This is the Anthropology Podcast, the podcast where we optimize the bodies, brains, and lifestyles of entrepreneurs, go-getters, and world-changing innovators.
Welcome to the Anthropology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Walker. As an anthropologist and naturopathic doctor, I optimize the health and performance of badass women changing the world as go-getters and entrepreneurs. You know, people kind of like you. Before we jump into the interview, I want to invite you to join our free Facebook community, Legacy. If you want to be something amazing, you need to surround yourself with amazing people. The Legacy community is made up of badass women living, not leaving, but living our legacy every single day. We are leaders, parents, entrepreneurs, and innovators collectively committed to leaving the world better than we found it. My mission is to support the health and optimization of these badass superheroes, literally to places we never thought imaginable. If you are on a mission and get it that your health is the key to your unlimited potential, then join us. We are super awesome. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/groups/BE Legacy. See you there. Today I had the chance to speak with Carlys Stein, and Carly is an awesome woman. She gave up her career at Goldman Sachs to follow her passion, which was beekeeping. Carly is an expert in this tiny little niche, which is producing high quality, totally authentic bee products. She corrected me. We are not talking about honey. We are talking about so much more. We got into this really interesting conversation, not only about the medicinal advantages of honey, her new nootropic agents, and all of the really cool things you can do with respect to your health, but we also got into the conversation around how to start a business related to food, how to be an entrepreneur as a woman, and how to pull all of these things together so that you are really offering a product to the world that is totally authentic. If you have a mission and a vision for what you want to throw out into this world and a passion for health, this is absolutely the interview for you. Carlys Stein, welcome to the Anthropology Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's such a pleasure to have you because we're going to be able to have a conversation on so many different levels. Your business is honey and propolis and health and food, but your story is really as someone who left this secure job to pursue her passion. And I'd really love to start there. Can you share with people your story as an entrepreneur and where you got to where you are now? And we'll weave some health and honey in along the way.
Absolutely. So I had an interesting background with this. So I kind of fell into the bee product area. So it all started for me. I mean, growing up, I have a reaction to antibiotics. So growing up, things like tonsillitis or strep throat or just a standard illness was a really big deal for me because I didn't have a typical course of action to address it. So by the time I was in university, I did a semester abroad and I had horrible tonsillitis to the point where I was going to have to come home and have surgery. And that's not exactly what you want to hear when you're doing your semester abroad and you're enjoying yourself in Europe as a college kid. So I was desperately looking for anything to keep me out there. I wandered into a pharmacy in Italy and I was given this weird propolis stuff and I tried it and it was just the first time that something worked for me. And after years of sort of wasting money on natural products that weren't really effective, it was just a huge game changer for my health. So I used it to recover from my tonsillitis and I was able to continue my time abroad. And when I came home, I just couldn't find it anywhere. I went to every health food store and I really just couldn't find a propolis product. So I went online and I contacted our local beekeeping association and they passed my email off to one gentleman who I could buy propolis directly from. And next thing you know, I became a beekeeper's apprentice. So that was a very strange hobby. My friends didn't really know what to do with me. I was like hustling to get out of cheerleading practice to go put my bee suit on and go beekeep with like a 60-year-old man in a weird part of Victoria Island. So that was definitely interesting. But when I started working with the bees, I was just completely fascinated. I really just fell in love with working with the bees and I had such profound effects with bee products. And I was just learning so much about all of the different products from the hive and their applications. And I just really fell in love with it. So I started making the products myself and actively beekeeping. And it was still really a hobby at this stage. And I eventually started giving these products out to my friends and roommates. And next thing you know, friends of friends were asking me for them. And there was just sort of organic demand for the product. So I was like, you know what? Why don't we incorporate and make this official? So I incorporated, but I still was a student coming out of school and needing to make a living. So I went into finance, and I was doing that for a few years and running my company on the side and having a lot of late nights trying to do both. And eventually my company grew to a place where it was necessary for me to go full time. And of course it was my passion. So I made that move. And I mean, I had a great experience working at Goldman Sachs, but my passion really is working with my company and building products that help people lead healthier lives. So it really was a no-brainer for me when we got to that stage.
And I'm sitting here smiling because I can totally understand walking away from all of those things to follow your passion and build a business. But what was the reaction of people around you at Goldman Sachs when you said, I'm leaving to start my bee product company?
People legitimately thought I was crazy, like fully crazy, because not only is it leaving like a very stable traditional path that people understand that it is a great on paper job, but it's leaving it to do something that doesn't make sense to people. People don't even really know what bee products are aside from honey. And people in that area tend to not be as open to the natural health world. So there was an interesting sort of response I got just based on those things. But it was really hard for me to leave, because not only was it just a massive career move and a big shift from and leaving something that I'd worked really hard at and really a job that I worked really hard to get, but I didn't really have any social support. So even my friends didn't really understand it because they didn't understand what my company was going to do. And they didn't understand why somebody who has this good thing on paper would leave that for something that is so niche and so strange and so unconventional. So, I mean, I probably should have left 6 months sooner than I did, but there was a lot of fear around it, and it was really sort of out of the social norm. So it was a very bold and big move for me.
I love it. I totally resonate with it. And I know that so many people listening are going to say, oh, thank goodness, I totally get that story. I'm happy to hear that there's other people like me. For those of you who are still sitting out there and kind of, you understand the security and you're like, I can relate to these people who think it's crazy to leave and build a bee product company. Can you enlighten them on what bee products are all about, and maybe we'll elucidate why you had this passion to leave?
Absolutely. So everyone knows honey, but there's so much more than that. There are various products that come out of the hive with a long-standing history of medicinal use. So one of the products that I mentioned, sort of our flagship product, is bee propolis, which is a fantastic immune booster. So it's a great natural alternative to antibiotics, and you can use it for things like cold, flus, sore throats. Royal jelly is another amazing superfood coming from the hive. It's the substance that's used to create a queen bee, and there's great applications there for brain health. So we just launched a nootropic product called Belixir Brain Fuel that uses royal jelly as an active ingredient, and royal jelly can help with everything from improving your spatial reasoning to helping to prevent neuroinflammatory conditions and helping your brain to sort of age in a healthier way. There's things like pollen. Bee pollen is a great protein source full of vitamins, minerals, and amino acids. And then, of course, you've got your standard honey. But yeah, so there's a real variety of healthy products coming out of the hive, and so much you can do with them in the natural health world. So I really felt there was a strong opportunity there to become a major player in this very niche space. And so far it's been pretty good.
Well, and what's the history of bee products being used from a medicinal perspective? I mean, I had always learned that this was something the Egyptians had used as medicinal properties. Can you give us some background in terms of some of the historical uses and how people came to use honey?
So it's really interesting. Bees have been around for 150 million years. And thanks to cave drawings and rock art found in places like Africa, India, and Spain, we actually have archaeological evidence that confirms that humans have worked with bees for almost 9,000 years. So you're totally right. Ancient societies like the Egyptians, people in Greece, Italy, and Israel, they actually developed organized beekeeping centers, which were around until the Roman Empire dissolved. And both honey and propolis were used by ancient Greeks and Egyptians for their medicinal properties. So they would use them cosmetically, and they would also actually use propolis in the mummification process because it's antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory and antibacterial. It was something that was pretty helpful when working with dead, decaying bodies. In Central America, the Incas would actually drink propolis to reduce fevers. And it's interesting that it's said that Aristotle coined the term propolis, which means defender of the city. Oh, one more interesting thing. In the 17th century, the London Pharmacopoeia actually listed propolis as an official drug. And during the Boer War, honey and propolis were used to treat soldiers' wounds. So we've definitely been using propolis and the different superfoods from the hives for a very long time. Yet our awareness about these products in North America is really lacking compared to Europe and other parts of the world.
What's the biggest misconception that you see people have with respect to bee products?
Big misconception, people who have bee allergies, they think that they can't have any bee products. Obviously, if you have an allergy, you do need to be very careful. But bee venom is a different substance than honey or propolis. And we have a lot of customers who are very allergic to bee stings, but have no reaction to other bee products. So, of course, consult your doctor if you do have a bee allergy prior to using them, but you shouldn't totally turn away from bee products. It could be something that could have really positive health applications for you in other areas.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And we're finding that more and more, right? Is that we don't have to completely stay away from things that we have an allergy to within the same family. And there is real opportunity for people to be able to leverage some of these products for their health. I kind of think of honey as the gateway bee product into all of the other really interesting things that people can start to incorporate into their life. And for people who are just starting out with honey, there's a big difference between the brand name honeys that you're going to find in the grocery store and what you are doing. What's the difference there? What should people be looking for when they're looking for honey, or maybe looking to avoid when they're looking for honey?
So number one rule of buying honey is make sure that it's raw or unpasteurized. You want to look for, it has to either say raw or unpasteurized on the label. The process of pasteurization, it's been heated at high temperatures, basically cooking and killing all of the powerful nutrients that make honey such an amazing superfood. So when it's been pasteurized, you're really left with like a liquid sugar substance. When it's raw, you're getting all of the amino acids, the antioxidants, the vitamins and minerals. And raw honey will crystallize over time. It will harden, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If that really bothers you, you can always stick your jar of honey in some warm water to let it soften. But crystallization, that's a natural process, and it's a good sign if your honey is going to crystallize over time because you want it to be raw.
Is there a different way that those bees and the honey is actually manufactured? Are the bees still pollinating flowers the same way in terms of making that honey? Are they using sugar? Are there other things involved in the process that people should know about?
I mean, the industry is a little bit opaque right now. It's a little bit hard to really know what you're getting, but to the extent you can talk to your beekeeper or learn more about the company producing the products, I would really encourage that because there's a huge variety in terms of practices. So what you'll see with a lot of large scale or commercial beekeepers is they'll actually overharvest the honey and leave the bees with just sugar water to feed on. So bees naturally will eat honey. And so with Beekeepers Naturals, we make sure never to overharvest, and we're constantly monitoring to make sure that our bees have a strong resource of honey to feed on their own and overwinter with, and we'll never replace that with sugar water. But a lot of companies will do that. So just something to be aware of. Another really important thing is considering pesticide exposure. So organic is kind of a joke in the bee world. I mean, bees can forage for up to 5 miles and the organic radius is less than that. So when I see organic honey on the shelf, it's really laughable. What we do at Beekeepers Naturals is all of the apiaries we work with, we are looking to work with very particular apiaries in very remote locations that have enough foraging ground where they're far enough away from pesticide-laden areas to make sure that there's no pesticide exposure. Another thing we do is before our raw product hits the bottle or jar, we do third-party pesticide testing. So we're trying to really be the leaders, the industry leaders in terms of high-quality medicinal-grade honeys and bee products.
That's so interesting to me. So how much pesticide would be in regular store-bought honey?
I haven't run a test on that. But I mean, it totally varies depending on the area, and it's definitely something to be careful with.
Well, and especially if you're the kind of person who puts honey in something every day. Like I get really obsessed about the things that people do every single day, because that's where you're going to get this cumulative burden. I would never actually really thought about that, because I think we buy things and we see it in a jar, and the backstory in terms of how the food got there isn't necessarily something that you think about really. Can you actually just take us through a little bit of the logistics around how we go from bees and we have this apiary, but like, what does that look like? Where do the bees come from in the first place? They're going off and pollinating and coming back? Like, what are the logistics of producing these products?
So how it works is there's an apiary, which is essentially a bee farm, and there'll be a bunch of hives on that farm. And what happens is the bees will go out and forage for food. So when they're foraging, they can go a pretty long distance, and they'll go out and they'll go from flower to flower collecting nectar and pollen, and then they'll bring it back to the hive to process. So they're always coming back to this base, but they'll go pretty long distances to forage, and in that process they can expose themselves to different pesticides and different plants and different parasites. So it is the area that your apiary is in is really important, and that's something that is really important to us at Beekeepers Naturals, and something that we really take into account when we build up our supply chain and choose our apiary partners. But to your point with not really knowing where things come from in the jar, it's really a challenge for consumers, because you see something like organic and automatically you think, okay, this is good quality stuff. This is premium honey. But the reality is that organic just doesn't account for all of the factors in this particular area. So it is really important for people to know it. We have one customer that it's coming to mind. She has an autoimmune disorder, and she was using this fairly expensive store-bought organic honey. And after about 6 months of using it regularly, she was having really strong reactions. So she actually transitioned to our products, and she's totally fine now. But it's just something you really do have to be careful of. And so I really encourage consumers to get as much information as possible on the companies they're buying products from in every sphere.
Yeah, and it's just a good general awareness now, right? That you actually need to ask questions about where your food is coming, because there's a halo effect with certain terms. People say that their beef is grass-fed, and we make all these assumptions about what the quality of the foods are in a restaurant. But often it's health washing, right? It's just really good words that they know are going to make you feel more confident. I want to have a bit of an understanding in terms of how you use your products. Are you using them every day? Are they in your tea, in your smoothies? Like, what creative ways are you using the line of products that you've created?
So I do use my products every day. I'm definitely a vegan.
I love that.
So I use honey as my go-to sweetener. So I'll put it in my smoothie. Any time where you would typically use refined sugar, I replace that with honey. So I like to make a lot of like raw treats and desserts, and I'll always use raw honey for that. And then we have a product called Bee Powered, which is a combination of raw pollen, propolis, and royal jelly. And I have that every morning. I use it just sort of to give me energy and give me a boost of vitamins and minerals and help balance my hormones. And then I do propolis almost every day for inflammation. And then if I'm feeling sick or I'm feeling run down or I'm traveling, I'll just use higher dosages of propolis. And I use our nootropic product, Felix or Brain Fuel, which contains royal jelly to improve my memory and concentration and also promote brain health. So I incorporate bee products into my routine literally every day. And I'll use different ones at different times, since they all have very different applications, but they've been really beneficial for my health. So.
And do you take other supplements as well? Or is this your staple?
This is my staple. I do some supplements. So I'll do omega-3s every day. If I'm doing a lot of traveling and I'm sort of eating different foods, I'll do probiotics. I'll do vitamin D if I'm in a place where I'm not getting a lot of sun. So I'll do other things like that, but I try to keep the supplements I'm taking pretty minimal. I don't like to overdo it. And then the other thing is I like to try and use food as my medicine. So I'll try to use food-based things. A lot of the supplements we do at Beekeepers, we like to do things in a liquid form. And we're constantly looking at how to make things more bioavailable. So that's something that I'm just really conscious of when I'm adding things to my routine.
Yeah, fair enough. And if people are going to do this all the time, can you comment a little bit on honey and glycemic control or blood sugar control? Because I know that that's a concern for a lot of people when they're picking their sweeteners.
Absolutely. So honey is lower on the glycemic index, and it depends on the ratio of fructose to glucose, which will differ per honey type. So some honeys can be significantly lower. But not all bee products are high in sugar, like propolis and royal jelly, for example. So our propolis has 0 grams of sugar, and we use non-GMO vegetable glycerin in our propolis, which has a very low glycemic index. And there was a recent study, it's a randomized double-blind clinical trial, and it was published last month, and it shows that taking bee propolis resulted in an improvement of glycemic levels in patients with type 2 diabetes. So that was something that was really interesting for us to find.
Yeah, that is interesting. I wonder if it's the propolis, or if you're going to be eating propolis every day, you're also going to be having a healthier complement of foods in general.
Absolutely.
There's always gateway foods and there's new habits. And this is why I was so interested in having this conversation with you, because honey is something that's just so easy to incorporate into your lifestyle. And if you're going to put honey in your tea every day, then why not put bee powered in your tea, for example, and add a little bit of propolis, which I add into my smoothies all the time. I throw it on top of salads, and it's got this incredible flavor to it, like in a really interesting texture. So it's not that it has to be a lot of work to start to be healthy. There's some like really fun ways to start to do it, and I think that you are leading the way in terms of some really fun products to get people into a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we try to make really innovative products. In regards to that study, I can definitely send you the link. It's really interesting. And it was just kind of cool to see that something that has a sweet taste that people with diabetes are typically skeptical of can actually be beneficial in certain capacities. So that was really cool. But yeah, like I said, there's just so many applications of bee products and so many ways to use them because they do have a unique flavor profile. So it's a really great thing to have. One little life hack that I'm a little bit obsessed with that I thought I would share with raw honey is using honey to help you sleep. So, I mean, you're an amazing naturopath, so you probably know about this, but maybe not all your listeners do. But raw honey is a fantastic source of tryptophan. So when you have raw honey, it triggers a small steady rise in insulin, which causes the tryptophan in the honey to enter the brain, where it's then converted into serotonin and then melatonin, which of course is a well-documented natural sleep aid. So I've been doing a teaspoon of honey every night before bed. Another way that honey can be really helpful in the evening is it can help maintain liver glycogen levels. So the body consumes glycogen even while asleep, and eating honey can make sure that the liver is stocked throughout the night and prevent your brain from triggering a crisis search for fuel, which can wake you up.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because I actually have a number of patients who find that they're restless like 3 a.m. And often it's because they actually have poor blood sugar control. And so they're kind of bottoming out and they're hungry in the middle of the night, but you don't necessarily have that. You can't consciously put that together while you're sleeping. It's fascinating. And my natural inclination with kids is like, oh, I'm just going to start feeding honey to my kids from a glycemic control perspective. In your opinion, am I worried about kids less than 1 from a botulism perspective?
Yeah, definitely. So I've anecdotally seen people who do it and are fine and have positive results, but I think it's really important to exercise caution when talking about small children. And I don't recommend that children under the age of 1 use any bee products.
Yeah, and I think it's great that we threw that out there, because sometimes when there's certain advice that has been around for so long, we actually tend to think that maybe that was just something they used to say, right? That's something our parents were concerned about. It's not something necessarily that we have to be concerned about now. So there's lots of cool ways of getting your very little ones to sleep. Honey just might not actually be it.
Yeah, at that age, I would definitely recommend other things. Bee products are really powerful, so it's just something to keep in mind when talking about children. There's children over the age of 1. There's definitely fantastic applications of bee products. So we have a lot of customers with children who are a little bit older who love propolis. I mean, it definitely tastes better than your typical cherry flavored cough syrup, and it's all natural. So that's a great thing to do. There was also a study that came out, and it was looking directly at pediatric chronic coughs, and it found that buckwheat honey was as effective as your typical over-the-counter alternatives. For children who are a little bit older, you can totally introduce it, but these products are powerful and they have strong nutritional effects. So I just think that for very young children, it's always great to be a little bit more cautious and just wait a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you say to use something like honey or buckwheat honey, are you literally giving them a spoonful of honey?
Yep. Spoonful of honey. I just do it. Typically, I'll start people with a teaspoon, and then if they need more, I'll move up. But because I am conscious of the sugars and our honey also, it's incredibly pure and high quality. So you typically need less of it.
Right. And quality actually really matters when we're talking about the medicinal effects of any plants or other categories of medicinal foods. I'm interested too, if we start to look at honey, the history of bees, and where things are going. I don't think we can talk about these products without talking about the environmental implications of herbicides and farming practices and the effects on bees. Can we go there? Can we talk about some of the threats to bees as it stands right now?
Definitely. So bees are critically important to our entire ecosystem. They produce 1/3 of our food supply. So since 2006, we've seen a steady decline in international bee populations. And there are a few reasons for this devastating decline, but one of the most damaging reasons is our modern society's frequent use of pesticides. So there's a specific class of pesticides that's particularly popular right now called neonicotinoids. And neonicotinoids are a neuroactive substance which can affect the bee's spatial reasoning and processing, which is really harmful for the bees who rely on their spatial reasoning to gather and forage for food and find their way home. So this is the most popular class of pesticide used right now, and it's seriously affecting our bee populations. And on top of that, despite these harmful effects, these pesticides aren't necessarily just sprayed on our fruits and vegetables. A lot of the time, the seeds are actually dipped in the pesticide, so it grows up through the plant's vascular system, which means you can't necessarily wash it off, which is pretty gross.
Yeah, and we were having a conversation a few weeks ago with Stephanie Seneff from MIT, who her area of focus is looking at glyphosate, and that's what we were discussing there as well. Is you can't just wash it off. It's insidious in the plant, and it hijacks your own biology, and that's exactly what's happening to the bees. And when you say the bees are responsible for 1/3 of our food supply, I think. One, it's important to part out. We're not talking about honey and bee products at this point. We're talking about how plants are pollinated, and if we don't have bees to be able to do that, we're in big trouble.
Big trouble. So things like almonds, avocados, apples, cucumbers, pumpkins, squash. I mean, the list goes on. There's so many foods that we rely on bees for. Not to mention wildflowers. And even if you're the type of person who isn't particularly interested in fruits and vegetables, bees also pollinate clover and alfalfa, which a lot of our livestock feed on. So the effects on our food system would just be absolutely massive. And going back to these pesticides as well, because they are water soluble, they're degrading our soil system and really hijacking our planet right now. So it's just something to really be conscious of and try to support organic growers and people who are doing pesticide-free farming.
Yeah, and so how do we make our food supply sustainable if we're focusing on organic farming? And I have my own thoughts on this, but I actually really welcome yours. And part of the lens through which I want to explore that question is that we have an audience of entrepreneurs. So I love putting these questions out there, not necessarily because you or I are going to have the answers to them, but because we have this whole audience of people who are innovators and their brains are wired to look at problems and find solutions. So how do we solve that? How do we solve the global food issue? And keep things organic so we don't destroy the planet and its creatures in the process? Go. Small question.
So, yeah, no pressure. So this is a really challenging question as well, also because I know the organic certification has received a lot of flack recently, and at this stage, I'm not even entirely sure how effective that certification is. So I'm much more interested in people who are doing things biodynamically. And I think that there's a real opportunity there. It's really hard with these certifications as well because they're incredibly expensive. So often I'll meet small scale farmers or producers who have otherwise organic practices but can't pay for the certification. So it's a little bit prohibitive from that standpoint. So if there was a structural change, I think that made becoming certified organic and becoming certified biodiverse farming area a little bit more accessible, or there was some sort of change on the government level that favored people with those practices, I think that would be hugely beneficial, because in most places, to get that organic certification, you have to have organic practices for 3 years prior, but not be publicly saying that your products are organic. So it's incredibly expensive, and then you can't really outwardly retail your products at those organic price points, which makes it almost impossible for people to sustain. So yeah, I think it has to really sort of be a top-down approach for this one.
Well, yeah, and it's hard because I speak to a lot of new food entrepreneurs, and we get to the organic question, and that's where the conversation really, it kind of stops, because there's such a chasm between how consumers interpret the word organic and the practicality of getting to that level. It seems to be a huge issue for a lot of people.
It really is. It's really prohibitive right now. I'd love to see that change. I'd love to see there be some sort of government grants supporting organic and biodynamic. And I'd love to see just more education on the consumer level about what to look for and who to support, and maybe a little bit more interest in supporting the people who have organic practices but aren't quite at the area where they can get the certification yet. So I guess there just has to be more of a dialogue there right at this stage.
Yeah, and so this leads to a really interesting conversation piece. And again, through the lens of we've got an audience of people who are innovators and entrepreneurs. For people who have an idea related to a food product, what are their next steps? Like, what is the avenue, and what kind of support exists for people to be able to move forward with their ideas?
The number one thing that I would do when you have an idea in the health space is just making sure prior to launching that product that you can build up the supply chain in a sustainable way. That was something that I had to learn the hard way. So what happened to me, just to be fully transparent, because this might help somebody else if they make the same mistake. So my biggest challenge early on, because we practice sustainable beekeeping, was building a structure that supported this as we grew. So obviously when we launched, I had projections and I had an idea of where we were going to go. And what happened was we blew through those projections in the first 6 months. And I was in a situation where I was basically doing the one thing that you're told not to do as a consumer product company, which is we couldn't meet demand. We were back ordered. So all of the retailers who had taken us on, they were now kind of jumping down our throats being like, hey, where's my product? And we just didn't have the supply chain to support it. And I will only work with sustainable producers. So I couldn't just go to your typical apiary or large scale beekeeper and get more supply. It's quite a process for me, because I have to really get to know them, get to know their practices, look at the surrounding land, and do all my pesticide checks.
The challenge with authenticity, right?
Yes. So, I mean, that was an interesting challenge for me to have early on, because it forced me to sort of make a big decision that would inform my business as we grow. And the decision that I made was, we're going to hold back and we're going to be back ordered for a little bit, and we're going to find the right people to work with and build up our supply chain in a meaningful way, and obviously create stores and create an infrastructure so that we don't have this problem ever again. But that was a hard choice, because I burned a lot of bridges doing that, and I was a very young company at that stage. And yeah, people were quite frustrated with having taken on our product, had great results with it, and then not being able to get it again. So that being said, my biggest advice is, if you have this fantastic idea and this fantastic product and great ideas about how to produce it in a sustainable way that's supportive to the environment, and once you get through all your projections, you should do a secondary take and say, okay, what happens if we just completely blow up in the next 3 months, 6 months, a year, and try to really build a strong infrastructure for those possible situations.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a really great problem to have, right? Oh, you're just so in demand that you can't keep up. But I mean, that has bankrupted companies before, where they have overstretched themselves.
Absolutely. So it sounds like a great problem to have. And in many ways, we're very blessed to experience that. But like you said, much larger companies have gone under. And something that might even be worse is companies have had to totally abandon their values and ethics and everything they stand for in those situations in pursuit of profit. So to avoid that situation and really remain authentic to your original idea and cause, it's really important to consider those sort of things, because supply is a real issue in our world, in the sort of natural, high quality world, because most things are mass produced these days. So you have to really find the right partners to work with and the right sort of structure to support what you want to do if you're going to do it in this way.
Well, and people just aren't used to authentic companies. So when you actually encounter a supply chain issue because the company cares about the quality that they're producing, consumers don't know what to do about that because it's in conflict with immediate gratification.
Totally.
Yeah, no, I respect what you're doing and in your commitment to doing it in a really authentic way. And I think that's what resonates with so many people who have this overlap between loving their health and respecting what that offers for themselves, and then this passion for entrepreneurism. It's a perfect anthropology mix for us. Carly, before we move into the next section of the interview, I have one last question for you here, and that is, how would you define health?
So for me, health is a state of well-being, physically and mentally, but more than that, it's knowing how to take control of your well-being in times of turbulence, because the reality is, especially if you're an entrepreneur, things are not always going to be running smoothly, and you have to have the right tools and the knowledge base to know how to reset and revamp in those times. Yeah,
what a great point. The control piece is so key. I say I want to treat people so that I never have to treat them again. So giving people the tools where they can take care of their health on their own is it's amazing, and it's a bit of a paradigm shift for a lot of people. Each month, I'm featuring a new anthropology quiz to help you unlock and uncover some of the physical performance blocks that might be holding you back from your true potential. This month, the quiz is exploring sleep. Besides digestion, sleep is one of the most fundamental things we need to be able to do as living beings, and we have historically undervalued this time of recovery to be able to keep us in peak performance. No longer is it about how many hours a day can you hustle, but it's really about how effectively can you sleep and recover. I want to know whether or not you are sleeping and recovering the way you should be. To learn more or to take the quiz, head on over to meganwalker.com/anthropology quiz. Okay, so what we're going to do now is the second part of the interview is what I call KPIs. And as an entrepreneur, you're going to be familiar with this in terms of key performance indicators. And we have them with respect to our businesses, but I think we also have them with respect to our health and lifestyle. And so with the intention of people having the opportunity to get to know a little bit more about you, I've got a few rapid fire KPI questions for you. The first one is, do you have a consistent morning routine? And if so, can you share it?
I try to have a consistent morning routine. Right now it's challenging, so I'm doing a ton of traveling. But I typically, when I wake up, if I can, first thing I try to do is do a morning meditation for 10 minutes. This is really constantly hard for me, because first thing, and I know you're going to be shaking your head at this because this is the opposite of what you're supposed to do, but right when I wake up in the morning, it is such a struggle for me not to immediately look at my email. Like, it is a real challenge. So I try really hard to not just wake up and start responding to emails, but take that 10 minutes. I also make an effort I use like the 5-minute journal, and I'll just sort of do a few things, or I'll use this app called Gratitude, and I'll write down a few things I'm grateful for, because I feel that really sets the tone for the day and really helps with an attitude shift that you can take into everything you're doing. So that's my typical morning routine. And then I start every day with a teaspoon of Be Powered, which I, of course, use for my energy levels and just getting the vitamins and minerals in. But my morning routine, it's a struggle, like I said, and it's a practice that I'm working on.
I appreciate that honesty, because I think for a lot of people, they would say their morning routine is a work in progress. Mm-hmm. Fiction or nonfiction? What are you reading right now?
Right now, I am reading fiction. I'm reading a book called Dune. It's a science fiction novel, but I read all kinds of books. I go back and forth.
What do you do for bee stings?
I love getting bee stings. Bee venom is fantastic
awesome.
for you. To avoid bee stings when I'm beekeeping, I mean, most people wear a bee suit. I'll wear half a bee suit if I'm feeling it. But I typically don't wear dark colors when I'm beekeeping, and I'll never wear like a perfume or anything. I mean, I don't really wear that stuff anyways, but things with artificial scents will sort of agitate the bees a little bit. So I try to go in with nothing on me. And then a really important thing is to just remember that the bees communicate through pheromones. So if you're freaking out and giving off and sending your body into fight or flight, you're much more likely to get stung. So I try to just be very calm. And I actually find beekeeping is an incredibly calming and meditative practice for me for that very reason.
And do you have something you put on the stings? Or you're just so tough now it doesn't matter?
I'm just really tough. No, I actually put propolis on the stings if I do get stung. Once you do get stung, you're more likely to get more stings, obviously, because they do communicate through scent, so they'll know. So if I do get stung, I'll just sort of walk away from the hives, put some propolis on it, cover it up. But to treat a bee sting, and really like any cut or wound or skin irritation, my go-to is propolis because it's anti-inflammatory and I just find it's really helpful.
Awesome. What do you do for fun or play besides beekeep?
Besides beekeeping, I love to surf and I rock climb and I love to hike, basically anything outdoors. If I can get out into nature, I'm happy.
And my last question for you, entrepreneurism. Are we born this way or do we learn to become entrepreneurs?
I think you can learn to become absolutely anything. I think if you have a passion for something, then you'll learn to become an entrepreneur.
I love it. Passion first, entrepreneurism follows. Carly, this was a really incredible interview and a really great opportunity to expose people to something I don't think many of them probably knew very much about. If people want to follow up with you and learn a little bit more about what you're up to, where can they find you?
So you can always check out our website, beekeepersnaturals.com. We also have an awesome Instagram page full of very cool bee facts, and the handle for that one is beekeepers_naturals.
Amazing. And we'll share all of that information on our show notes, and you can also find us on our Facebook page. Carly, again, thank you so much for spending some time with us. This was really, really cool stuff.
Thank you so much, Megan. It's great to talk to you as always.
If you enjoyed our conversation and would like to hear more, head on over to Stitcher or iTunes and subscribe to the Anthropology Podcast. We would also really appreciate a quick review. When people have their health, they can change the world. Let us keep you healthy and you go change the world.